Good morning, all. It's 8 o'clock. We've got a lot that we need to get done today. So I'm going to call the committee of the full insurance committee of the House to order. We're going to start with an invocation, and I am going to call on Representative Tarvin if he would do that. Representative Tarvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shall we pray? Our Heavenly Father, we come to you, Lord, thankful for the many blessings of life. And Lord, we ask that as we take part in this decision-making process for the citizens of the state of Georgia, that you would lead, guide, and direct us, and would always be mindful to do things that are pleasing to you and good for the people of Georgia. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you. We have a few bills and several speakers this morning, so we need to move right into that. The first bill on the agenda is from Dr. Dean Burke, Senate Bill 566. Dr. Burke, if you would please come to the table mic there and present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring forward Senate Bill 566, and the LC number is 520127S. This is a bill to perfect the surprise billing legislation that House and Senate worked together on and moved successfully a couple of years ago now. It tries to accomplish a couple of things. One is to make sure it's clear to everyone that mental health visits to the emergency room are considered emergency visits and would fall under the auspices of surprise billing. And the other thing is to make it clear that if someone is admitted through the emergency room for an emergency visit and they have to have an inpatient stay, that from the standpoint of billing services, that's considered one episode. The only other small tweak is to, again, make sure that if someone chooses to have an elective procedure in a place that's out of their network, that they understand and they get all of the consents done, that they will be billed as an outer network if that's what their choice is. If I want to go to a specialty hospital that's outside my network for something that I think is important to me and I'm willing to pay for it, then that's how the private market should work. So that's basically the nuts and bolts of the bill. I appreciate the subcommittee perfecting it yesterday, and be glad to answer questions.
All right, thank you. This was heard in subcommittee yesterday, and there's been a lot of work on this bill. Everybody that appeared yesterday was favorable to the passage of the bill, supportive of it. I know Chair Lady Taylor worked closely with it, so appreciate your good work on this. Are there any questions by members of the committee? Online? I see none. I'll entertain a motion. We have a do pass and a second. All in favor, say aye. 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 Online, all opposed, like sign. Your bill passes, sir.
Thank you, and I appreciate Chair Lady Taylor agreeing to carry this on the floor of the House. And thanks for y'all's cooperation. And I'm going to see if we can go past the big budget now.
Please, thank you, thank you. The next bill we have is Senate Bill 487. Senator McNeil, if you would please approach the table mic there. And again, we heard this one in subcommittee yesterday, and there's been a lot of good work done on this. So present us your bill, and we'll entertain questions after that.
Thank you very much.
Your LC number.
Senate Bill 487 aims to diagnose.
What is your LC number? Let's make sure we've got the right. LC 520128S. Yes. Is that the one that you have? Very good. Right? All right. Thank you. That's one we're working from. Thank you. Go ahead.
SB 487 aims to diagnose breast cancer earlier by eliminating out-of-pocket cost for medically necessary diagnostic and supplemental breast examination. Elimination out-of-pocket cost for diagnostic imaging would improve access and lead to more patients receiving early detection services. Typically used as a follow-up test after abnormal finding on a screening mammogram or clinical breast exam, diagnostic breast imaging is an essential tool in the screening and diagnosis of breast cancer. Additionally, this legislation is critical for breast cancer survivors, as diagnostic imaging is typically recommended as a primary breast cancer for breast cancer survivors. A screening mammogram would not be considered successfully completed and the following diagnostic imaging were not performed to rule out breast cancer or confirm the need for a biopsy. If individuals are unable to afford the costs associated with diagnostic imaging, many might delay or forego their test to rule out, to confirm if a breast cancer diagnosis, leading to later stage diagnosis, making it much harder and much more costly to treat. In 2022 alone, 9,170 people in Georgia who were diagnosed with breast cancer, and 1,410 will die from this disease. The committee sub includes three changes. On lines 23 through 24 and lines 37 through 38, we include specific standards that define what is medically necessary by the National Comprehensive Cancer Network. Number two, lastly, to comply with federal law around high deductible plans, we add the new language in lines 51 through 59. I can turn it over to Leah. Is she here today on Zoom?
We've already heard
Okay.
testimony,
You don't
and
need
we
any
don't
more?
need the testimony anymore.
Okay.
We've heard this in subcommittee, and thank you for bringing this. This is an important measure. And I know, again, Chair Lady Taylor has worked very hard with you to make sure that we've got everything
great.
that we need in the bill. But I will open it for questions from members of the committee if there are any. Number 12.
Thank you,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman. I wanted to thank the lady for bringing the bill. This is a very good bill. It has become an issue for a number of women when they are needing these treatments. So thank you very much for bringing
I've
it.
had people stop me saying that they're taking that and how expensive, less expensive it would be if they had done that.
All right, number 29.
At proper time, I'd like to make a motion.
Well, seeing that there are no other questions, I believe this is a proper time.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to pass.
Do I have a second? Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, like sign. Online. Your bill passes.
That's
Thank you.
wonderful. Our bill passes.
Your bill passes.
I want you to
Thank
know
you.
I had a lot of help from
I'm
this
sure.
gentleman.
I'm sure.
So
Good
it's
measure.
nice to have the
All right.
Republicans and Democrats work together.
All
isn't it?
right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We also have some other things on the agenda this morning. We have some speakers that I believe would be very informative for those of members of the body, particularly those that may not work in the field of insurance themselves. So Dr. David Hartwig is here with us. I'm going to recognize him, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about some property casualty issues.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And my name is Bob Hartwig, as you mentioned,
Bob,
just for
I'm
the
sorry.
record. That's all
Pardon
right.
me.
That's all right. Thank you for allowing a professor from the University of South Carolina to appear here. I've braved the traffic here this morning. It was, but
I
I'm glad
believe
to be here.
you've appeared before us. In the
I
past
have
with
on a
different
number of
things.
occasions. First time since COVID, though. So glad to
All
be
right.
back.
Well, good to
All
have
right. Well, without any further ado, because I know we're pressed for time, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what's going on in the private passenger auto market here in the state of Georgia, and compared to some of your neighboring states, what's going on in the U.S. overall in comparison, and talk about some of the pressures that the industry is experiencing here, and that is ultimately impacting rates here in the state and, quite frankly, across the country. I will begin with a little bit of analysis of the competitive profile of the state of Georgia's auto markets. We'll talk about some problems, of course, here on the roads of Georgia. I'm not talking about the traffic jam I was in this morning, but highway deaths are really up, and this is just mirroring what's going on with respect to every type of claim here in the state of Georgia. A lot of very severe claims, sadly, and the other issue that is issued the day across the country and impacting auto insurance is inflation. And I'm going to bring to you some numbers that show you some of the pressures that we're seeing there, and then certainly have some time for Q&A at the end, or anytime. Feel free to stop me. But how competitive is the state of Georgia's auto insurance market? Well, I'm pleased to report very much the same as it was when I was here a couple of years ago. There are about 200 private passenger auto insurers competing for your business here in this state. They wrote about $10.5 billion of premium last year on about 4 million vehicles. And this state is growing, and it's growing fairly vigorously. The private passenger auto market here, according to Department of Justice standard measures, is what they would call not concentrated. In other words, it's a very competitive marketplace. And I think, anytime you turn on the radio, you go to a sporting event, I think that that. So let's begin right there. And we can talk about the fact that any pressure on rates that we're seeing here in the state of Georgia in terms of auto insurance have nothing to do with a lack of competition in this state. But there are a lot of other issues. And one of them is, I'm going to begin with something that's a big public policy issue in the state, but which actually leads directly to some of the problems that we're seeing in auto insurance. Beginning at the top, the most severe no accidents are more severe than those involving fatalities. Unfortunately, in Georgia last year, we hit at least what I can tell is a record in the 20 years or so of data that I have, 1,824 deaths, up nearly 10% from the previous year. I don't know why that's kicking out. Okay. And then, so that's about up 160 from the previous year. Even during COVID, when far fewer people were driving, the number of deaths was up about 11%, believe it or not, here in the state of Georgia. So really didn't see any improvement on the roads as a result of COVID or people driving less. And when you look at the GDOT analysis of what's going on, it's really not surprising. The fatalities, nearly 60% of them aren't wearing seatbelts. About 70% of them are associated with unsafe driving behaviors, including distracted driving, driving too fast, all these sorts of things that lead to accidents. And about 17% of these, unfortunately, were associated with pedestrians, and no doubt, no small number of them, unfortunately, were children. When we look nationally to see what's happening, so I mentioned in Georgia, we were up about 10% last year in terms of highway fatalities. We're on track to be up about 5% nationally. So Georgia is nearly twice, increasing by nearly twice the national rate in terms of the number of highway fatalities, and Georgia was well above the U.S. in 2020 as well. So something's going on here, and in fact, in this map, what you can see, this comes from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. The states in green have increases in highway fatality rates in excess of 5%. But again, Georgia is well above that. These are the latest data that they have from 2020, so up about 11%. So that's far above the U.S. overall, which was about 6.8%. So Georgia is above the U.S. for the last 2 years, and it's above most of its neighbors for the past couple of years as well. Now, Americans are clearly behind the wheel, but that doesn't explain all of it. People seem to be making up for the accidents they didn't have during COVID, including the fatal ones. And what we could see is that the number of miles driven nationally, and this would be true in Georgia as well, is basically, while it fell about 11% during COVID, it's basically just about entirely come back in 2021. And in fact, barring $6 a gallon gasoline for completely different reasons than we would have anticipated a few months ago, we would expect to hit a new record in terms of number of miles driven in the United States and most likely in Georgia in 2022. So up to about 3.3 trillion miles in the United States. So let's get right down to the auto insurance data for the state of Georgia and make some comparisons with the region and with the United States overall. I want to bring you some information about the relative profitability, the return on net worth. That's what RNW stands here, of private passenger auto. And I'm comparing it here, Georgia auto in red against the U.S. overall in blue. And what you see is there was a departure around 2012, and Georgia has remained well below the U.S. Average in terms of return on net worth. In other words, profitability relative to the U.S. overall. Prior to that, it was pretty much similar to the U.S. overall. So there's no argument that can be made here that private passenger auto insurers are making anything in terms of a supernormal or an unusually high profit. In fact, it's probably the opposite is the case. U.S. profitability was 5.9% over the last 15 years for private passenger auto. In Georgia, it was about 3.4%. And that was as low as nearly about 6%, negative 6% back in 2016. It's come back up a bit, but that's largely because we were starting far below zero. If we take a look at Georgia in comparison to other states in this area, I'm trying to bring up the other states. They should hopefully come up. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you could see Georgia. It's a little hard to see, actually. It's in gray. It's the gray bar that on the right-hand side is usually the bottom dotted line. And only very recently in the last 2 years has Florida turned in a worse result than Georgia has. But the other 4 states in this region, Tennessee, Alabama, and South Carolina, well, in the U.S. overall, all have higher rates of return than here in South Carolina. So again, no evidence, no demonstration of some sort of unusually high profit being generated in this state by auto insurers. So there we go. And you can see how Georgia lines up as the lowest in the region, 3.4. The highest in the region being Tennessee at about 7%. And if we take a look at how the Georgia auto insurance in red, which again is 3.4%, compares to not just US auto, but also the Fortune 500 rate of return. That's what you are seeing in the gold line going across the top, and the orange bars on the bottom are US personal auto rates of return. So you see that US auto rates of return are, again, with the exception of 2020, where they're pretty much identical to the Fortune 500. Georgia and the US are kind of below average relative to, again, like the Fortune 500, S&P 500 types of rates of return, generally speaking. So where are we in terms of the actual crash data that insurers see and the data that they actually use to build rates from here in the state of Georgia? Well, what we're seeing is that claim severity, in other words, the average cost of claims, very much echoes what we are seeing in the most severe of all claims. In other words, the fatality claims. And beyond all of that, we have a lot of pressure coming in from inflation, which we're experiencing throughout the overall economy, but which is intensifying, obviously, in recent weeks and months in particular. But if we look at the most recent data that we have available, which is for the third quarter of 2021, and we compare it to full year 2020 data, we could see that collision claim severity, in other words, the average cost of a collision claim is up about 32%. Bodily injury severity is up about 26%. Property damage liability is up about 16% nearly. And then we've got about 10.5% increase for comprehensive coverage, which has a lot of weather-related impacts associated, but it is also influenced by repair costs, which are being greatly impacted by inflation. And I'll get into that in a couple of minutes. So here you can see the trend in bodily injury severity here. So we're talking about repairing people in this particular instance. And the awards associated with that. And you can see pretty steady upward trend. So we're up to about $26,600 of the most recent data that are available. And again, that's up pretty steeply over the past year, with only a very temporary flattening out in the very early stages of COVID. And so here you could see the changes in percent terms. So it's the data I just showed in the previous chart, but converted into percent terms. And you can see how not only is the bodily injury severity trend fairly large, well above the overall pace of inflation, well above the pace of medical inflation, but it's growing. It's accelerating as we moved through 2021. And I would expect that pace to continue as we get the final numbers for 2021. Same sort of story, although not quite as intense in the property damage liability. So this is if I'm in an accident and I damage someone else's vehicle, or I damage their property, run into their house, their business, something like that. You can see that rising as well. The average claim is about $5,300 towards the end of 2021, and that is up 15.6%. From 2020. So that is a pretty steep rate of return, a rate of inflation, or a rate of acceleration in terms of those costs. And there you see those previous numbers just converted into percents for all the numbers that were in the previous chart. So again, particularly in the last quarter, a rapid intensification. And again, this is very consistent with the intensification of inflation we're seeing generally in the economy overall, as well as a recovery in the economy, people driving more and, quite frankly, more recklessly, as we saw from the GDOT data. If we move over to collision right now, thinking about your own vehicle, there you can see a pretty good jump in the most recent quarter. This represents about a 32% jump from 2020, the most recent data point here. But again, these numbers continue to increase. The severities, the collision claim frequencies, basically just about every type of claim severity continued to rise even during COVID. And here you see the previous numbers for collision. You can see the kind of very surprisingly large numbers in terms of the increase in the cost of your average collision claim, up 56% in the second quarter of last year and up another 28% relative to same quarter in the prior year in the third quarter of 2021. So I don't really see anything that's going to send these trends into reverse. The best we could hope for, hopefully, is some sort of slowdown and hopefully some form of stabilization. So in terms of, so obviously insurers certainly look at that severity data. Ultimately, this translates into loss ratios, essentially what we're paying out in losses relative to the premium dollar that's being taken in. This does not include any of the most of the expenses and profit provisions and so forth. And what we could see is that the loss ratio in Georgia and in the US is rising. And we went from a loss ratio of about 65.7 in Georgia in early 2021 to 85.3. So nearly a 20-point jump in the span of just 2 quarters. Again, this corresponds, this is in lockstep with the deterioration that we've seen in the experience on the highways and byways all throughout the state of Georgia. So I would expect these numbers to continue to increase. So this is something of grave concern, not just from a public policy perspective of what's driving this increased accidents, increased deaths, increased injuries, but obviously the impact ultimately on auto insurance costs in this state. The last major coverage type I wanted to discuss was comprehensive. This is very much a function of weather, trees falling on cars, hail, tornadoes, all these sorts of things. The weather has been quite wild over the past several years, as we know. And this particular coverage is also vulnerable to higher inflation, higher labor repair costs. And I think that's what we're seeing here, in addition to some weather-related effects. So we're up about just 3.7% from 2020, but more than 17% from 2019. And so there you could see the most recent increases on an annual basis for the comprehensive coverage. Again, severe weather, inflation, but other things like crime, vandalism, increases in stolen vehicles. That's where this coverage would come into play as well. Now, I thought I'd just throw this in here because I mentioned weather. I've never actually previously mentioned weather in an auto insurance context, but unfortunately, the weather has claimed quite a few automobiles across the United States over the past couple of years, millions of vehicles being drowned or damaged. And when there's not a lot of vehicles to be had. And so that creates another pressure point in terms of the prices of vehicles. Last year in the US, we had about $85 billion in insured catastrophe losses. And in fact, the last 4 out of the last 5 years have been record or near record highs. So these do take tolls on autos. We hear about homes and businesses a lot, but they do take their toll in terms of billions of dollars of automobile losses across the country. And, as we're approaching tornado season, might well have a tornado warning here tonight. We'll see. Or later today. Now let's see, private passenger auto and inflation. This is one of the major issues right now. Every industry is being impacted by inflation. There's no question that the auto insurance industry is. This is a principal driver of the higher severities, in addition to the increase in poor driving behavior and more driving. The overall inflation rate in the U.S., these numbers have been bumped up substantially just in the last few weeks. So we're expecting 7.5% inflation for the US in 2022. That's up from nearly 5% last year. Ultimately, if this persists, this leads to a problem with respect to rate adequacy in the private passenger auto business. And I think we're already beginning to see some of that with those loss ratios moving up to the highest level they've been in quite some period of time. And ultimately, in some lines of insurance, you can wind up with a situation of whether reserves are adequate or not. But we'll focus more on the rate issue in this particular context. So you can see the rapid escalation in inflation in the United States, the year over year. So the annual numbers is the number you see in the blue line right there, and the axis where you read that is over on the left. So in January, we're up 7.9%. The newest numbers are actually 7.9% February over February. And you probably heard that number in the news, this being the highest inflation we've experienced since the early 1980s. And where are we seeing that? One of the principal drivers. And in fact, I believe in the most recent month, if not February, it was also the case in January. The principal driver of higher inflation was actually related to vehicles. Okay. We've heard a lot about energy prices and gas prices. But new vehicle prices and used vehicle prices have gone through the roof. And here you can see that the price changes for new vehicles in January 2022 up about 12%. That's the highest, the fastest increase we've seen since March of 1975. 1975. So I had to dig out the archives for this one. Okay. So you're going back almost 50 years to see something similar. And insurers are having to replace a lot of vehicles out there from some of the data that I've presented to you earlier on. If we look at, if I look at used cars in trucks, which is what many people might be in the market for, what we see here is that just over the past 2 years, from just before COVID to January of this year, the price of used cars and trucks is up about 55%. Just 2 years. And so if you've gone out in a car lot anytime recently, guess what? You don't see much, as you've all probably noticed. And so this has driven these cars absolutely through the roof. And insurers are very often having to replace people's new cars and used cars. And they're very, A, difficult to obtain, B, difficult and expensive to repair. And when you can get them, they're far more expensive than they were just a couple of years ago. And from everything we're being told, this situation, which is related to all kinds of problems in Detroit with respect to securing microchips and processors and production problems and so on and so forth, is unlikely to abate anytime soon. So, so when you think about the vehicles that aren't totaled, but have to be repaired, they're going to be in the shop. The repairs are taking longer, and I'll show you that in a minute. But when you look at the replacement vehicles, if you've rented a car down there at Hartsfield anytime soon, you found out that if you could even get one, the price of it is a lot more. Well, one of the biggest customers, if not the biggest customers of Enterprise and Avis and Hertz, is in fact the automobile insurance industry. We pay for that rental car while your car is being repaired. So the cost of that rental car is up about 19%. In January of this year, it was up about 20% year over year in October. These are the highest numbers we've seen since 2012. So in about a decade in terms of rental car replacements. And not only are the rental cars cost about 20% more, in order to get your car repaired, it takes about 3 days longer to get it repaired. So you've got repairs taking longer and the replacement vehicles taking longer themselves. The repair itself is costing more. So you could see it's coming at the auto insurers from every single angle that there is. And you could see down here in Georgia, you could see that the length of collision replacement is actually among the highest in the entire country. At 17.1 days. I think that's about third in the country or so. So only to Oklahoma and Louisiana being higher.
All right. I mean, we've got some, you provided us with a lot of information so far, and I know that you have a lot more that you could provide us with. But we also have some other speakers here this morning.
So there you go. And I'm basically done.
We may try to get you back again. I think we've got a couple of questions. If you could entertain those just momentarily.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Representative Tarvin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The age-old question, you did do a good job putting about 15 presentations into one. But no, I'm serious. Is there any way we can get a online copy of this or a copy to Chairman London with his permission to?
It's been sent already, right? Yeah.
Yeah, this is the question we get asked is why is my car insurance so high? This pretty much explains it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Going back to the numbers, as far as the increase in the accidents, injuries, fatalities, what, and we know the data that you're presenting, we understand that. Any reason, I mean, what's causing it? Is there anything that you've been able to identify in your research that's driving those at this present time?
Right. A lot of it has to do with excessive speed. That's one part of it. People got used to driving fast when the roads were emptier during COVID, and they've kept that up. That's one part of it. The distracted driving issue, at least across the country, hasn't gotten much better. We had a distracted driving bill here in this state, which actually I think was making some headway. It's hard to kind of tease that out from everything that's going on in the data right now. A lot of substance abuse related issues out on the road, whether it's alcohol or some sort of other impairment. So it's a combination of factors, but and we saw from the GDOT data, almost 60% of the fatalities, people aren't wearing a seatbelt. So you know, that's an issue, and more congested highways as well. So that's another one. Yep.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you much,
Thanks
sir.
for being here. We have another few other presenters. Dr. John Tchaikovsky, is he with us today? Please. All right. Tchaikovsky or Tchaikovsky? Tchaikovsky. Okay. Well, you know, depends on which pronounce video you go to, you know. I believe you're going to talk with us about some health insurance related issues,
I
correct?
am, yes.
All right.
So a little history of me. My name is John Tchaikovsky. I am one of these guys that works in the trenches. I'm a consultant. I own an insurance brokerage, privately owned. I'm carrier agnostic. I'm not here to protect any insurance carriers. I'm here to tell you what's happening in the markets and how we can potentially improve what your constituents are experiencing when they're shopping out their options. So first and foremost, I am part of an association, the National Association of Health Underwriters. We primarily consist of insurance brokers, people that work in this industry, directly communicating with everyday folks, business owners, HR departments, et cetera. My company primarily consists of the three major markets. So I'm one of these unicorns that works both in the Medicare world, in the under 65 individual world, and then the group markets as well, from small businesses down to 1 or 2 employees, all the way to the medium-sized companies, 500-ish. So when we're talking about how my association gets involved, it's situations like this. And I would like to thank everybody that was able to make it to the Georgia Association's meeting earlier or I guess last month across the street. So when we're discussing how I fall into this, I'm working with everybody that needs to consider what options are available. And I will applaud this body. We, like the last presenter discussed, we've created and nurtured one of the most aggressively competitive markets in the insurance world in this state. So whatever we're doing, keep it up. I was asked to talk about 4 different topics: spreading risk, network access, controlling costs, and advocacy. So I'm going to hop right into this. Spreading risk. It's pretty common knowledge. More bodies in the claims pool is going to spread the risk across the entire market. So how do we incentivize people to get into insurance? We have a ton of folks that are walking around uninsured, whether it be due to cost, whether it be due to education in terms of why I would want insurance and why it's important. When we are trying to figure out how to approach this, this is where brokers play a significant part. I'm in companies talking about why this is important. I'm in individual meetings with families discussing what they need to consider for their next calendar year, the next 12 months. At this stage, we have tried as a nation both incentivization options, carrot versus stick. The stick, the penalties involved with the Affordable Care Act at the very beginning, that didn't work out so well. Now we're at a stage where we've got a federal administration that is supporting the individual market through larger subsidies. And my own company, we've seen a dramatic increase in how many people are requesting access to this information. So in the event that this state goes into developing its own insurance shopping portal, that's something that's been discussed. This is something that we need to take very seriously, because when we're talking about increased costs, inflation, et cetera, it comes down to, do the dollars make sense? So Again, Georgia has created one of the most competitive insurance markets, and that is a very different situation for a lot of our neighboring states, even to the left of us. The legislatures have either created or allowed monopolies. And that's something that I fear for every state in this country, because less opportunity to evaluate options means less opportunity to enroll. Even our neighboring state to the left, they have really one insurance carrier to choose from. And the brokers are boxed out of it. The insurance carrier, they are working directly with applicants. And that doesn't really give them much opportunity to think about this. You get a box set of options, pick and choose whatever you want, and you're off. So we saw that happen a couple of years ago in the individual market when Blue Cross was the primary insurance carrier to choose from. Well, when there's one insurance carrier to choose from, if they get slammed with claims, they're going to pick up their ball and leave. And that's exactly what happened. Now we're at a stage where we have one of the widest variety of carrier options to choose from in the country. So again, it leads to higher premiums when we have reduced selection. These carriers are running a business and they're going to make business decisions. Let's make sure that we are creating these markets, or I guess nurturing these markets to continue bringing in new insurance carriers, new product options, et cetera. So then we get into networks. Networks are very tricky, both in the individual and the group markets, because on the individual side, the insurance carriers, they have tried to cut costs where they can. And you'll see that every comprehensive product out there is a skinny HMO network. That's something that the insurance carriers, they've kind of been forced into. They've had to align directly with insurance, with hospital systems. And that's a pro and a con. So when the Affordable Care Act first hit, big provider organizations, for instance, Laureate, they didn't contract with anybody. They kind of did their own thing. And on the group side, they were fine. But the individuals, they could not seek care from the providers they had been seeking care from. Nowadays, these organizations have directly aligned or been purchased by hospital systems. That is a gift and a curse, because the insurance carriers, they are offering access to this, but at a limited scale. On the negative side of this, it forces people to choose which providers are more important. And that's a very difficult discussion to have with families, because let's say I've got cancer, I've got orthopedic situations. I've got to literally sit down and decide which provider is going to be going to satisfy the necessity that I have. So on the group side, a long time ago, there were, I'll pick on Aetna for a second. They had a specific network in Metro Atlanta called Excel. And that was the first start, at least since I've been involved in this industry, to really maximize how to utilize proven and consistent providers. The issue with that is that the people that signed up for these programs, they did not realize that if they were living in one of the designated counties, they were forced to see providers on a very short list. And so that kind of blew up in Aetna's face. On the group side nowadays, they are creating specific alignments with hospital systems. And that provides the group HR departments and business owners an opportunity to reduce their expenses, because these plans are still consistent, they are still rich, but it limits the service area essentially. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when we're talking about how that impacts everyday people, Blue Cross, they're directly aligned with Northside. And we're in the middle of a contract renegotiation that is extended well past the deadline. And the state court system, they've gotten involved and they've granted an exception to continue the discussion. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Same thing with United Healthcare and WellCare. When we've got a contract negotiation, it doesn't just impact the hospital workers and the services that you get under that hospital roof, but every provider that has been purchased by these insurance carriers
Well, this is,
or hospital systems rather.
this is something that I've been saying for some time, and I think what you've said today just really drives home the point. But in the health world, it's not really insurance in its truest form anymore. It's about negotiated rates. It's
Correct.
about, so there's a lot more that goes into that. Some great information. We do have some time frame and another speaker. Will ask the members if there's any questions of the presenter right at the moment. I don't
Okay.
see any, but fascinating. Thank you so much for your time
My
and
pleasure.
for the information you provided to us. We also have some Tori Brumelo and Richard Gray. Are you guys here? Yeah, please come. Yeah, come to the table. That will be fine. And I think they're also going to present some things to us about the health insurance world. Do you want to come to the microphone or so? Okay, all right, go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead, just stop talking to the
Good morning. I'm
microphone.
Richard Gray.
Richard Gray.
This this is Ms. Brumlow, and we're here to talk about an outpatient, excuse me. Okay, we're here to talk about an outpatient radiology savings program. We have a, I'm sorry. We're here to talk this morning about an outpatient radiology savings program. This is a service offered through a company called Price Transparency Analytics. Price Transparency is in our name, and that's what the program is about. This was born out of an affiliated relationship with another company that has been in outpatient radiology in Georgia for about 25 years.
Before you get started, we've got about 10 minutes, so I'm just giving you a time frame. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I can talk really fast. So here we go. So I was recently at a chamber, I think it was called Future of Georgia event. And at that event, there was a statistic that basically said there are maybe, these could be not real numbers, but 400,000 open positions in Georgia and maybe only something like 200,000 people available to fill them. So those numbers are probably off, but you get the idea. So one of the things that employers have to do now is attract and retain top talent. And all of the employers, both private sector and public sector in the state, are looking for ways to both retain and attract top talent. And one of those things is through benefit incentives. And so that is what you can consider our program, Know the Cost. We are an add-on benefit that provides an incentive under radiology, their radiology benefits. So meaning we are adding this on to their employee benefit plan. So what that does for the employees is it reduces the amount of money that they would spend on diagnostic radiology costs. On the company side, it also reduces the amount that they would spend on radiology costs. So this is important because oftentimes radiology expenditures make up about 10% of an overall plan spend during a plan year. So 10% is significant, especially when 70% of those radiology exams are done at inflated rates, meaning they're not done at fair market rates. So our goal is to capture that 70% and reduce it. And in doing so, we often save our clients, the companies that we work with, 30% on their radiology spend year over year. So those are big, significant savings. And how this looks for the employees, and this is the most important thing to me, because I communicate with the members on a daily basis with our clients. So under this radiology benefit, our members receive any outpatient diagnostic imaging exam, so MRI, PET, CT, ultrasound, at zero cost to them. They will never have a copay. They'll never have a deductible. They will never pay towards coinsurance. So in turn, that eliminates any opportunity for surprise billing. So really big bonus there. On the company side, we are capturing and reducing inflated diagnostic imaging exams and reducing them so that anything flowing through that would have flown through the plan design would be reduced. So the company is saving money, the employee, their spouse, their children are saving a lot of money. And I just kind of want to show you a little bit how it works on the member side very briefly. So all of our members receive a card. It has all of the information they need, a QR code, a place for their doctor's office to request an appointment to initiate our program, stepping in and helping them save money on diagnostic imaging. And if they lose their card, we can email it to them, text it to them. We're working on an app so that we have direct contact with them all of the time and they have it on their phones. So that is sort of how they are able to utilize the benefit and take advantage of it. And again, no surprise billing ever. And I just kind of want to give you a little bit of feedback. So we have both public and private sector clients, and we work with counties in the state. And we recently had a police officer call us and say, I have to get an MRI to get back to work, and it's going to cost $1,700. And I don't have $1,700 in my budget today. And we explained to him, no, let us help you with this. It will cost $0 if you use our program. And he did. And later his wife called and said that $1,700 is so important to their budget. And she was so thankful that his county, the county that employs him, had this benefit so that they could allocate that $1,700 somewhere else. So really important to our clients. And again, we can work with both fully underwritten and self-insured benefit plans. It does not matter. And we can work with basically any type of employer. And I don't know if I'm going to get into that, but so again, we typically reduce radiology spending around 30%, and we can work anywhere in the nation. We have no geographic limitations. Anywhere where we have a client, we can add providers. And we can do it in real time as well. So if, somebody hires a remote employee in Los Angeles and they call us and they need an MRI, we can add a network provider in real time for them. Yeah.
Any questions? Number 12.
Oh, and we also provide real-time customizable reporting. You'll have an example in your booklet. There's one in your booklet and there's one separate. So you can look at the type of reporting that we provide. And these are actual clients. So these are not fake numbers.
Oh.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative
Chairman.
Chapman, yes.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you have your clinics or your places where you have these services in rural communities?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Thank you.
We have about 30 locations in the state of Georgia.
And we can add them as needed as well.
All right. Well, I think all of the presenters have been very informative this morning, and particularly in this area of healthcare, there's a lot of things that can be available that we need to know about. So thank you very much for your time and for your presentation. Thank you, members of the committee. We're dismissed. On to the next committee.
Yeah, absolutely.